Hello and welcome to Tea with Jess. I'm Jess Montgomery and I'm delighted you're joining me for a tea break. As Nana says in my Kinship Mystery series, life is hard, have tea. Today's mug features a very young version of our oldest daughter when she played the trombone in a marching band in high school. So that's my tea mug for today. And today I'm delighted to be chatting with Ron Rollins. He's a visual artist who describes his paintings as action, abstract, and gestural. My husband and I have his paintings in our home, and actually our younger daughter, not pictured on this particular mug, has two of his miniature paintings in her home in Columbus, paintings that have literally traveled the country with her from Ohio to Colorado to California, and now back to Ohio. So Ron's art has been around the country, if not the world. So he is a retired senior editor for the Dayton Daily News and Cox Media Group, Ohio. And I first met Ron in 1990, which I did the math, and he's probably going to be not thrilled that I did, but it's 31 years ago when we both attended the Antioch Writers Workshop. And about 10 years later, Ron brought me on board the Dayton Daily as a regular freelancer, weekly humor columnist. I wrote a humor column for 10 years, and then I became the newspaper's weekly literary life columnist, role I just wrapped up. And we also worked together on the Antioch Writers Workshop, me as a director, Ron as a member of the board of directors. And today I'm happy to welcome Ron to Tea with Jess as a fellow creative and friend. Hi, Ron.
Hello.
How are
Hi,
you
Jess. How are
today?
you?
I'm
I'm fine.
good.
I'm cheating a little bit on the mug thing. We're taping this past my normal tea or coffee time, so I'm drinking water. But I did bring, per the rules, I did bring a new favorite mug, which has a
Well,
story I'm happy to share. So,
I think
do you want to
Nana
do you want to
will
hear the
allow
story of
that.
the mug?
Yes, we want to hear
Well,
the story of the mug.
there are Appalachian roots to this. As you can see, it says Mothman Search Team, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And
Yeah.
my family hails from West Virginia and Southern Ohio, or my wife's family hails from Southern Ohio, where your books are set. We're sure we're distant cousins of some sort. My wife's maiden name is Taylor, and there are Taylors intermarried into various branches of the Rollinses in West Virginia, going back about three generations. And so, given the proximity of West Virginia and southeastern Ohio, we just sort of like, hey, cuz. But anyway, so my aunt still lives in Fayetteville, West Virginia, which is near Oak Hill, Beckley area. And recently went down to visit her. And on the way, I was traveling with some youngsters who wanted to stop and see the famed Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And here, up there, there we have the. Are you familiar with the legend of the Mothman?
Vaguely, yeah. I think I've seen it on like X-Files and Supernatural and shows like
Yes,
that.
it is the Mothman is a cryptid, if you will, is a legendary monster from the Point Pleasant, Kanawha Valley, Ohio River area down there, and he was spotted in the allegedly spotted in the mid 1950s by three kids who were out way too late one night, running around the hills, drinking and doing other kid stuff, and claimed that a large man with bat wings, all gray and giant glowing red eyes, think cicada, was dropped down in front of their car, flapped around, scared the hell out of them, and flapped off. And then they immediately ran to the police station and reported what they saw. Then, of course, in the manner of all cryptids, Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster, stuff like that. Suddenly, everyone started seeing the Mothman because he was out there, right? And so there's now a very small storefront museum, and when I say very small, I mean very small, like about the size of your living room and kitchen, like small storefront museum dedicated to the Mothman in Point Pleasant. It is a very campy, kitschy, good time to visit, and I strongly recommend if you have any interest in Nessie or the Bigfoot type stuff, you stop by. So I didn't know I had that interest. I enjoyed the Mothman, and now I am a member of the Mothman search team. My mug makes it so. So
That's awesome. It sounds like,
yeah.
you could do an abstract, um,
Oh, I could.
gestural, an action painting. So why action, abstract, gestural? What do those terms
Well,
mean?
Well, I'm sorry I'm not in the studio today. My schedule did not accommodate doing this from the studio, and the Wi-Fi there is pretty precarious anyway. So I didn't think in a perfect world we'd be able to be doing this in the studio, and I could just point the camera, at some stuff on the walls. I if anyone of your if anyone watching is familiar with the abstract expressionist American painters from like the 1940s, 50s, 60s, Jackson Pollock, Franz Klein, Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, Hans Hoffman, Robert Motherwell, that whole group, Willem de Kooning. That's just always been my favorite kind of stuff. I don't have formal art training. I've taken a lot of art history college courses and postgraduate courses over the years, and I know a lot about art history and composition and stuff, but I'm not formally trained as an artist by any means, especially since my career was in newspapers, as you said.
Mhm.
Just I started. My mom was an artist. She was a watercolor of note in Ohio. She passed away last year, but and I miss her. But she was president of the Ohio Watercolor Society for a number of years, and so she made a dent in the state and regional, arts scene, and she was somebody who put her art making aside to raise us kids, and then came back to it as an empty nester. And I guess that's kind of what I did a little bit too. Once my kids were out of the house, I sort of started to scratch the painting itch a little bit and try my hand at putting marks to paper and seeing what stuck. And um, I I I can do representational and figurative work. I can draw. I can make you a nice landscape, um, but I don't enjoy it. The art that I always enjoy at the museum, and where I find myself when I go to an art museum, which is as often as possible, is in that gallery that has all that modern and abstract Jackson Pollocky type stuff. And when I look at it, I try and look at it with an eye toward how did they do that? I mean, it's not just a bunch of swirly paint stuff. There's distinct thought to it, and there's real concentrated effort and composition to it. And I'm always intrigued by it. And I decided about 10, 12, 13 years ago, that's kind of what I wanted to put my hand to. I'd never done that kind of painting before. And I found that regardless of how it turns out at the end of a particular piece, I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy the making of it. Fortunately, I found out that there's people who also enjoy buying it when I'm done, which is nice. And
Yes.
so I kept at it. I've got so that's the why.
That's an
I just
interesting
let's just
connection
Yeah,
because I always, when people ask me writing advice, one of the first things I tell them is to think about, well, what is it that they love to read?
right.
So there's an
That's very
analogy
good
there
advice.
of, what is it you
Right,
love to
right.
appreciate in your visual arts?
I do like all kinds of different. I don't want to sound like I'm a one trick pony in terms of the
Oh
kinds
yeah,
of art I
no, I
enjoy
understand.
looking at. But if as I said, any art museum is my happy place. And I'm one of those art museum guys. My wife hates this. She wants to go through and be done. She likes art, but she's not a lingerer.
Hmm.
I'm very much the Capricornian. Stop, read every label, go back to a piece that I remember from four galleries back, and look at it again, and then come back to it again, and it drives her nuts. So I spend a lot of time in art museums by myself because I'll go and just enjoy them at my own pace. And we're lucky to have the Dayton Art Institute in town. I mean,
Hmm.
it's an excellent museum. It's a small museum, but we're a small town. Um, I grew up in Oberlin, Ohio, which is where Oberlin College is, and was fortunate from like fifth grade on to be able to ride my bike as a little kid down to the Allen Art Museum, which is Oberlin College's art museum, and it's a world-class, world-renowned art museum. It's small, but it's part of the college and part of their arts program, arts education program, and it's fabulous. It has a fabulous encyclopedic collection in a beautiful Romanesque building right about 2 miles from where I grew up, and I could go down there every weekend and just study the art, you know.
Oh.
And so that's kind of where it came from. That substituted for a formal art education for me, and so again, I found myself sitting in front of the abstracts, even as a little kid, like, ooh, how did they do that? So,
So was your mom an
yeah,
inspiration
that's
as
the high of
well
it.
when you were a little
She was,
kid?
she was in terms of encouraging us. Mom was encouraged all of us to pursue whatever creative pursuits we were interested in. I have a sister who's kind of a fiber artist and a seamstress. I have another sister who, or I have a brother who, a younger brother who went to get a fine arts degree at Ohio Wesleyan, and ended up as an arts administrator in nonprofits in New York. So I mean, there's uh, art stuff throughout the family. You know, I mean, we were encouraged, back to books. We were encouraged and allowed to read anything that came into close proximity enough to open it up, and there was no books we couldn't read even as young kids. To this day, I you know, I'm like, did mom and dad really let me read that when I was like in fifth grade, you know? And um, the answer was yes, and it turned me into the reader that I am today, and probably also led me into journalism, because uh, books and words and writing were just always part of my makeup from a young kid. But I drew a lot too, and mom did encourage that. I Once I got to college, I'd stopped that. I
Mm.
wasn't I wasn't drawing anymore. I mean, every little kid is an artist until something makes them stop doing it. Usually, an adult that tells them that no, the sky is supposed to be blue, not yellow.
Yes.
Um, you know, grass is green, not red. Well, actually, there is red grass, and the sky is often yellow. You know, I mean,
Oh.
kids, kids often, kids often get, kids usually get put off. If you think how early children start to draw to express themselves, they do it before they actually know how to write or read.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the urge to draw and to create and to put marks on paper is almost hardwired into us before the ability to read and make marks that are alphabet. You know, a 3-year-old is drawing long before she's reading, right?
Yeah.
And then by the time she's about 6 or 7, she's in school, and some well-meaning teacher says, "Oh no, no, there's 5 fingers on the hand. You can't do that." I mean, and
Yeah.
then basically she stops doing it because she's discouraged. And that's just at our house that never happened. So I was very fortunate. In
Yeah. Yeah,
terms
you
of my
are.
mom encouraging, yeah, she did, and she was charmed and amused in her later years to find that I was picking up a paintbrush and throwing paint all over the canvas. She never quite. She did a little bit of abstract work, but never our stuff never quite aligned. But we liked each other's work and talked about it a lot. So yeah.
So I'm hearing supportive home, a wonderful art
Oh yeah,
museum just down the road from you. That
you're hearing it.
instinct, and it's interesting to me that you know, did it take you a while? So I want to talk about specific inspirations, but did it take you a while before you looked back and realized, oh wait, this is the style in which I was painting even as a kid, or the kind of art I was attracted to as a kid, or you know, did you know right away? Oh yeah, I want to go back to that.
I think so, but I can't tell you exactly when it happened.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I know that, like I said, I've always been an art museum prowler, and while I like lots of different kinds of things, I'll just say I don't spend a lot of time in the early Renaissance, big, you know, Rubenesque biblical scenes gallery. I just don't. I like that stuff. I know all the artists' names, and I know when they worked and where they grew up, and blah blah blah. and I know their general styles and history just because I've got a brain for history stuff. But I don't spend a lot of time looking at ribbons, going like, "Oh yeah, that's great." Yeah, I mean, you put me in front of something by Jackson Pollock, and I'm like, oh, how did he do that? This mark here, what's that? How did he make that happen? Where was he standing? What was his hand doing? How was he layering that color on top of those other colors? How did he bring that out from behind? Anybody who's watching who knows the Dayton Art Institute, I would advise and recommend to pop down to their current exhibition. Special exhibition is on the 60s, and they've drawn it during COVID from their own permanent collection. It's not it's not one of those traveling shows that museums often get. This is from the permanent collection of the DAI, and it's up for, check the website. I think it's up for the rest of the month, and it's really good. There's a lot of really cool abstracts there, including my favorite painting in the museum, which is an untitled abstract by Joan Mitchell, who was one of the second generation abstract expressionists and just a wonderful painter. And in her mind, she was always painting landscapes, but that's not what you necessarily see first when you look. They're very abstract. And there's a beautiful piece that they have that I think is probably the finest Joan Mitchell I've ever seen, which says a lot for a museum like Dayton. And a lot of greens and grays and blues, and it's a large, probably 5.5, 6 feet tall by about 4 feet wide, and it's just this splash of green and blue, and it's perfect. It's beautiful, and I love it. And I would recommend you go look at it, because you'll see you will see in that painting what I'm always in my mind wishing I could accomplish when I'm working at the canvas. So
I just made a sticky note of
it's a really good painting.
Yeah. So I want to.
It's always up in there. It's up in there. Good. It's in their permanent galleries when it's not in this show. So it's one that they'll never take down. It'll always be up in the contemporary gallery.
I don't go there often enough. I try to cross train, or just get not cross train, because it's not like I'm training to be a visual artist, but just get inspiration from other forms of art. And speaking of inspiration, like for a given piece, how does this work for you? Do you have a schedule? Like, sometimes, often I'm not inspired to write. I just know I have to sit down and do it. Do you like, okay, this is my painting time? Or do you get like into the zen of the moment? Or do you have a plan? Like, I want to make this gestural painting be like a sunset, or be like a cicada, or Mothman, or how does an individual piece work?
I'm sitting in my 3-season room watching cicadas fly by, as you said that. I at the risk of disappointing, I can't really give a single easy answer to that question. Although I think it's an excellent and wonderful question. I guess I'll do my best. The answer is yes, sort of, to all that. One thing is, I'm retired now, as this was a year January 1st. So I get to spend more time in the studio than I used to. And for anybody who wants to stop by, I have a studio in an old commercial storefront behind Town and Country Shopping Center, 4096 East Town and Country Boulevard. We're actually right behind Tuesday Morning and across from the back of Trader Joe's. So if you know the Town and Country,
it's in Kettering.
For those, it's in Kettering, and we're easy to find. I mean, you just rollinsart.org you have on the screen will get you to my studio. And thank you for the website shout out. When I'm painting time, I will find, I always wish I was painting, but I have to be at the studio to be doing it, right? Because it's messy. I work in acrylic on canvas, and my pieces. The picture you're showing up in the little window here are some smaller pieces that I did a few years ago. That picture was taken at Yellow Springs Brewery for a show I had about 6 years ago. Nowadays, I tend to work large. Most of the canvases I work are like 30 inches by 40 inches, which is a decent size. Sometimes I'll actually do a piece that involves 2 canvases combined. You know, I
Hmm.
like working large. Many of the painters from the historical period we were talking about that I admired did. There are not very many small de Koonigs. I mean, these painters tended to work big, because the heavy abstract, colorful, gestural stuff lends itself to size, in a way that people who I look at it and like it, I think, get. Um, so I have to make a point to be at the studio to do it. When I'm at the studio, there's a lot of times where I'm just sort of sitting around looking through books or reading poetry or drinking bourbon or talking with my friend that I share the studio with, where I'm not making stuff because I just don't feel like it. And then there's times where, yeah, I do have I am seized by a desire to make, and I'll make a lot of things in quick succession.
Hmm.
I tend to make a piece. I tend to I tend to work very fast. Things get thought about a lot more than they. More time goes into the thinking and planning than the actual making. If you look at a piece of mine, and I will say that there's a lot of the artists that I've studied did spend a lot of time going back into the pieces that you see in the museum. I don't. I find if I go back into a piece, I'm going to mess it up. I tend to be like a one shot guy. I will go in if I may put down a background color and then just start the composition. And usually I've thought about colors and someone's gone. I've thought about colors ahead of time, but the composition comes out of my hand and the mood I'm in when I'm right there at that time. And it's
Okay.
very fast. I tend to paint with a trowel. I do use brushes, but I like a mortar trowel that's like about $1.99 from the hardware store because it has a very sharp edge, a sharp point. I can smear with it. It's a very easy tool to make large smearing compositions and gestures with. I think people enjoy watching me paint because it is a lot of movement, but it's also very fast. And if it doesn't go well, I know it right away. Usually, it's because I spend too much time on something and it turns into mud. There's a
Hmm.
couple of colors involved, and if I make a wrong move, it's a wrong move, and I can go back and fix it maybe. But just yesterday, I was working on a commission piece that just did not turn out the way I wanted, and I just scraped it off and gessoed over the canvas and started over. I mean, I knew right away I didn't like it, and no harm, no foul. It's just paint, you know. Scraped it off, started with a clean canvas, and I will also repaint over things. If something is in the studio for a couple of years and it hasn't sold, and I'm sick of looking at it, I'll just repaint over it.
Wow.
I sold a painting about a month and a half ago that it was actually had about 4 or 5 paintings underneath the one they thought they were buying. Um, so years from now, when the uh, scholars are studying me and they're X-raying my stuff, oh, he had something else under there. It's like, yeah, whatever. So,
So you just mentioned your commission. So I want to ask about that. Where all has your work been displayed besides my home and
I've
my
been
daughter's?
Yeah, and I'm honored to be in your private collection. I've been in a couple of members shows of the Dayton Visual Arts Center, Springfield Art Museum. Actually, the deadline for the Springfield Art Museum of Art members show is upon us. I need to Dayton Society of Artists. I've been in their members shows several times. I've had a couple solo shows at some local businesses and some smaller galleries in town. I have a show coming up at a friend's gallery, the Cathartic Slant Gallery at Front Street Warehouse on
Okay.
the first Friday in August.
Hmm.
Uh, and that'll probably be about 10 or 12 pieces in a space that is and one of the many very cool galleries at Front Street. The Front Street Studios in Inner East Dayton, next to downtown. Um, uh, you know, kind of. I'm always on display a little bit at my studio because it's uh, it is a commercial storefront with big open. It's all glass, and it has my name and Terry Welker. Terry Welker's name. He's the sculptor that I share the space with. And I've got 2 big walls in there that are visible from the sidewalk and the parking lot, and so you can walk by and you can see 4 or 5, 6 pictures hanging up pretty much all the time. And I do rotate them, knowing that people do stop by and see them. And I'll get texts from friends or oh, I was by your studio. I really like what you have up. I'm like, well, it's for sale. Facebook is a good place. Facebook and Instagram are good places to sell. I sell a lot of stuff that I'll post on Facebook and ask and tell people, message me if you want to know more. I don't. I'm pretty affordable. Dayton is not a big town for high art prices, and I tend to price pretty reasonably. I think, and I've been told I underprice a little bit.
Yeah, you do.
People know, because I would rather see it. I don't have a lot of money tied up in materials, and so I figure I'd rather move it out of the studio and get it onto a wall that likes it, rather than have it sit around and get repainted over. So I probably sell a piece a month, enough to cover my studio rent.
That's
Um,
great.
I had a busy month last month because I had some old pieces sitting around in the studio, and I just popped a Facebook photo of like 7 or 8 of them sitting up on the wall, like cheap to a good home. Call me if you're interested. And I ended up selling like 6 of them. Shipped one out to an old friend in New Mexico. I mean, it was like hadn't heard from her in a couple of years. So yeah, it's very gratifying when people are happy to pay money for something that you've created, and it makes you want to go on. But and answer your question about, like, what do you get in a zone? Yeah, kind of. Music helps. Listen to all kinds of different music, everything from classical to hip hop and anything in between. And music. What's playing actually does affect my mood a little bit when I'm painting, especially I find late at night. Um, and then there's times, like I said, with the one I told you I scraped off. There's times where you'll start working on something, and this as a writer and a creative person, you just ain't feeling it.
Yeah.
And it's like, put your brush down and do this tomorrow. There's nothing set. The universe is not going to shoot your dog if you do not make something today. You'll be fine.
That's right. And so will the
Just
dog.
go ahead and do it. The dog will be fine. Just go ahead and do it tomorrow. The canvas is still waiting there for you tomorrow. It'll be just fine. So
That makes sense.
which
Well,
is
now
yeah, it's fine.
you've said a couple things so I was the kid who, like every kid, and I love that you point that out. The kids have, this desire to express. And I love the photo on your website, by the way, of you with your grandson painting. I just think that's so charming in so many ways.
The grandkids love the studio. They love to come down to it.
Of course, they're going to be with grandpa, and he's going to, help them get messy.
That's true.
But I was kind of stopped by a few comments early on, and so I'm fine with that, because I have my own creative expression as a writer and in other ways.
Right.
But
I hear you're doing pretty well too.
I'm doing all right. But so there's something very encouraging in you saying, that you weren't formally trained, but you're self-trained by going to, the artists at the museum. You've gone to multiple museums. You've studied on your own, and very encouraging that you recognize this is something we can tap into. But then you've also said a few things that honestly I think would feel a little intimidating to anybody who might be listening, who wants to tap back in. You've referenced that you have a studio, you have commissioned work now and again, and that's not something you just leap into. That takes a long time to get to that point. Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's listening to this and thinks, I do remember that I loved creating, pottery or, whatever it was when they were younger, and they want to try it again? What would you say to encourage people?
Well, that's a really good question. And I try to encourage people a lot. I tried to do that. As a journalist and a manager and as a community volunteer. I mean, I like to think that honestly, in retirement, I've pretty much pulled back from just about all that stuff, and I figured, like, 45 years of it was enough. But
Yeah.
let other people do it now. So I've always tried to encourage folks to, I share my networks with people. I try and connect people together to get them, like, oh, well, if you want to do that, you should talk to so and so because she likes that, and here's her number, and that kind of thing. I do that a lot. What would I say? Well, first of all, you just do it. I mean, the same advice that you get at writers' workshops, right? If you want to write, you have to do it. You can't. You can't. It's a lot more. It's a lot more fun to call yourself a writer than to actually be a writer, because being a writer means you actually have to work, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
more.
that's a
It's
pain.
more
No.
fun to think. It's more fun to think about the book you'd love to write, and
Hmm.
as an author, Sharon, how many times have you met people? You say, "Well, I'm an author," and somebody will say, "Oh, I've always thought about writing a book." It's like, "Well, really, have you? That's
Yes.
great." You
A
said,
lot.
"Right, right." My version of that is like, "Oh, my kid could have painted that." Well, but they didn't, So, um,
Oh gosh.
uh, um, you just have to do it. I can deconstruct and demystify some of the stuff that you said might sound intimidating. Um, um, and I'm going to bring this back to Dayton too, because
Okay.
I'm assuming a lot of the folks who are watching this are here in our community. Um, um, the studio thing happened kind of by accident, and it happened in partnership. So I mentioned to my friend Terry Walker, who was the guy that had the idea to get a studio space. You have to remember what I do is very messy, and it takes some space because I'm working large and I am literally throwing paint around, like taking a paint and putting it in my hand and throwing it. I mean, and so I am making a mess a lot of the time. So there was a limit as to how much I could do what I do in my house. I mean, I was doing it in the garage for a while. I used my son's bedroom as a studio after he went to college for a little while, and it got really messy. And my wife was very patient. She's like, I don't care, just we'll repaint over that. That's fine.
Aw.
After a while, I realized I simply needed to get out of the house to do it. And it came at a time when Terry was looking to get out of his basement where he was working to work on larger public sculptures and mobiles, which he does. And we just kind of joined forces and split the cost of the studio and found a place that was near our house where we could get to easily. Um, and we just kind of did it. We had both been making art for quite some time before we got the studio. And then once you're in there, you just find, that that's the place you want to spend time. It's like a third space from your
Mhm.
workplace and your home. And
Mhm.
and it's okay. It is fun to go to. Mo- a lot of people go a long way in an art career and or an art hobby just using a room in their house. Using a guest room or a spare room or an office or a study or a basement or a garage. I mean, most of the people that I know in town who are also artists do tend to work out of their house. So that's their studio, right? And that's fine. You don't need a third place to go. It's nice if you got that. I'm pleased I could afford it, but I you don't need to have it. After a while, you get out there and people will, in terms of commissions and stuff. After a while, people will come to you and say like, "Well, hey, here's how it happens. I really like that piece. I have this couch in my living room that has these colors in it. Like, is there a way that I would love this piece if it had blue in it?" And I'm like, "Well,
Mm.
I can do that." I mean, I'm not. There's a lot of artists who might think like, "Well, no, I don't do that." It's like, I don't do that. It's like, if you want blue in it, I'll give you blue, and I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to create a piece for somebody that accommodates the style and color that they have in their own home, because I want them to have it.
Mhm.
It's not just about making money. It's really nice to know that it's in somebody's house and that I made something that they love and that helps them with their own creative environment in their house. I really like that. It's sort of like the part of journalism where, back when we were making newspapers, it's like it goes into their house every day. It sits on their coffee table. It sits on the kitchen table. You're making a thing that ends up in people's hands in their home or at their
Hmm.
office or on the way to work. It's like it's a very journalism even today when it's mostly coming to you on your phone. It's still a very personal business because you're putting words into them to consume and think about and to shape their view of the world. If I can do that with a painting, then I'm happy. So
Yeah, that's a
after a
really
while,
cool way to look
things
at it.
build over time. The advice that I would give to somebody getting started is find other artists. This is
Hmm.
where I'm bringing it back to Dayton. Dayton has. I would encourage anybody who's really thinking about um, toe dipping into this to find other artists. And the places the first best place to do that, I'm going to say, would be the Dayton Society of Artists on which in St. Anne's Hill in the near downtown. They have a lot of classes, a lot of workshops. They have a lot of a lot of shows that are members shows where you can find yourself in a community very quickly of other people that you can bounce ideas off of. Um, the Contemporary Dayton, formerly the Dayton Visual Arts Center,
Hmm.
um, just reopened in the arcade.
Oh,
Member join the Contemporary Dayton. They for an artist membership of 150 bucks a year, you can get a portfolio review. They will teach you how to photograph your work,
wow.
so that you can actually display it professionally. They'll critique your CV. They'll teach you how to do marketing of your work. When I was trying to figure out how to price my work, um, I talked to Eva Buttacavoli, the director at the
Hmm.
DVAC, for advice. She's an old friend, and I'm like, how do you even start to figure out what this is worth? And she's had advice from me over the years. And she's actually sold some pieces for me by connecting me with people that were looking for, like in an office environment, for example, looking for big splashy abstract stuff that she knew was similar to what I did. And she's like, if you can make three of these, they want them. And I'm like, okay, I can do it. So, I mean, that's how you connecting. It's like find the places in your community, whether in Dayton or wherever you live, that are, and even small towns have things like these organizations.
Hmm.
Um, and large cities have a lot more of them. Find the one that suits you. Like I said, in there's a lot of artists and visual artists in Dayton. And here's the thing about Dayton too that I love. When I started, when I came out of the closet on all this, about 12, 15 years ago, I'd been making art for a while, but I had been keeping it in my own to myself rather than showing it in public because for many years I was the arts entertainment editor at the Dayton Daily News, and I
Hmm.
was in charge of covering who got written about, or I was in charge of deciding who got coverage of their art. And so I wasn't going to be a member of that scene, right? I mean, that would have there. I had to keep a professional distance at some level from. Well, no, the person who wrote about the visual arts was either me or somebody who reported to me, because I did cover the visual arts scene in Dayton for a while. I wrote about the Dayton Art Institute for many years
Hmm.
as part of being the arts editor, and so I wasn't going to be showing stuff, right? I mean, I just didn't. It didn't feel right. It was many years after I had that job when Terry Welker was the one who said, "You don't have that excuse anymore. You can't. That's not what you do now. You can't use that as an excuse not to show your work." And I'm like, well, but it's really been comfortable to have an excuse not to. It's been a nice wussy blanket to keep me from being embarrassed in case people don't like this stuff. And he's like, they're gonna like it. Just put it out. And so I found a couple of places, some community art shows to show stuff, and got a very early positive response from other artists. And that's the thing I love about Dayton. It's the kind of a town where um, people knew me as this as a local journalist. I was known as kind of one of the fixtures at the newspaper, And it was sort of like people didn't mind that, oh, well, yeah, you're a newspaper guy, but oh, you paint too? That didn't bother anybody. It was like, oh, you paint too. That's great. And it was very welcoming, and the environment was very supportive of in the local arts community of like, oh, Ron paints. That's great. What was he? Oh, we like that. And it was very supportive and welcoming. And I think there's probably a lot of towns that aren't that way. And Dayton is like that. And I think if you have a creative pastime or pursuit or passion, Dayton is a really good place to air it out and share what you're doing and get feedback and ask people for support and ask people for ideas and input and a chance to hang on their walls. And I think you probably experienced that as a creative here yourself, covering the
Oh, yeah.
especially covering the literary scene for years.
Oh,
Dayton's
absolutely.
Dayton's poetry and creative writing community are very much the same as the visual arts community.
Yes.
All the people who are writing in Dayton know each other, and it doesn't matter if you're writing a romance novel or some weird hippie trippy experimental thing or a historical fiction, or trying to publish a poetry chapbook. All the writers in town know each other and love each other and support each other and back each other up. And if you're having writer's block, you call them up, get me out of it. I mean, that's it. I think that's what I experienced through you a lot,
Yeah.
with the stuff that you were writing in the newspaper. So Dayton is a magnificently wonderful creative hotspot that I think people who live here know. If you don't live here, then I hope maybe that's news to you and you'll come visit.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. There is a sort of a supportive attitude, with writers, and I'm glad to hear that's the same with visual artists. And and it's
Very
interesting to
much.
hear the path and the life is similar in many ways. To tap into your original inspiration, to find your voice of what is, what works for you, your voice as a
Right.
visual artist, and to build that community around you and to let it kind of slowly grow. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for all of that.
Sure.
We've had a great chat. I think we're going to wrap up here. And I'll just say thank you, Ron, for joining me, and thank people
You're
who are
welcome.
listening live and who listen later for joining me, Jess Montgomery for Tea with Jess. And until our next time, take
The
care of
Mothman
yourselves.
mug.
Yeah, get a Mothman mug and take for your tea break, and take care of yourself and your loved ones, and have